I hate to be the pretentious film nerd who is still gushing about Dune Part 2 several months after the movie was released, but I never got the chance to discuss my full thoughts on the feature, so I thought I would take the time to do that now. Following the events of Dune Part 1, Paul Atreides is on a quest for revenge against House Harkonnen since they secretly conspired with the Emperor to destroy House Atreides. But as Paul unites with the Fremen of Arrakis, he unintentionally becomes a prophetic and messianic figure to the people. Now, after the release of Dune Part 1, Denis Villeneuve solidified himself as my favorite director working in Hollywood, so obviously I was looking forward to seeing this movie, and while I do think that I personally prefer Part 1 of this adaptation, I can't deny that Part 2 is an awesome, mature, and complex film that has a lot to say about faith, religion, politics, and more, and those themes do provide the movie with more depth than the original. Plus, the narrative does provide a satisfying conclusion to the events that began in Dune Part 1, so I understand why some people may prefer Part 2 over its predecessor. I just happen to like the original since it brought me into this world in the first place. Because I never read the original Frank Herbert novel, and I probably never will, so Denis Villeneuve's epic take on the material is what made me fall in love with this universe. And Villeneuve is a masterful director who knows how to combine thrilling visuals with epic stories flawlessly. So, despite the fact that Dune Part 2 has a lot more going on both narratively and thematically, it never has too much going on. The plot is never too confusing or too dense to understand what is going on, even in spite of all the characters that are in it, and the story itself is engaging enough to keep you invested in everything that is going on. But even with all of that being said, my biggest issue with the film probably comes from the pacing of the narrative. Because I personally found the first half of the feature to be a little sluggish. The movie begins with a particularly slow pace, which is totally fine, because once the momentum starts to build, the finale does come to a satisfying conclusion. And yet, ironically enough, I do think that the finale moved a little too quickly. I wanted to bask in how awesome the finale really was, but every plot beat was just zooming on by. So I do wish that the beginning would have picked up the pace a bit, and that the ending took the time to slow down a little. I also wish we got to see more of the galaxy here, because I know that there are other great houses on other planets, and even though they may not be super important to the story being told here, I wish I knew how the other houses felt about the events that were unfolding. Especially since Paul sets out on a path that could eventually change the shape of the galaxy as a whole. Like, I really enjoyed getting to see the Harkonnen homeworld, and I think it would have been cool to see how different other planets were as well. Still, I admire Villeneuve's ability to keep a tightly focused narrative, especially with a huge story like this. I just wish that said story didn't feel restricted to Arrakis specifically. But at any rate, I really like how the story depicts the growth of Paul Atreides as a character. He's much more of a leader now, who shows a lot of strength and power, even in spite of his less than intimidating physique. But if I saw Paul fighting alongside the Fremen, winning every battle he ever fought, effortlessly learning the ways of Arrakis, riding on top of giant sandworms, and giving great speeches that could unite an entire people, Yeah, I would probably worship him too. And though Paul doesn't initially believe in the Fremen prophecies about him, I think it's clear that his status as a leader does eventually change him. So Timothée Chalamet does an excellent job of portraying this complex and interesting character, as I do believe that he delivers the best performance of his entire career here. He provided Paul Atreides with a surprising amount of nuance, which helped me understand his character a bit better. Because I, like most people who never read the Dune books, probably saw Paul Atreides as a regular hero archetype, but based on his depiction in this movie, I now understand how his character could fall from grace. So Villeneuve's description of Dune Messiah, where Paul's prophetic ascendancy is meant to be taken as a warning, finally makes sense to me. Which is good, because if Paul ever did turn to the dark side, that development wouldn't feel as abrupt or as forced as the fall of Anakin and Daenerys becoming the Mad Queen. But Chani is the only character who can see that Paul's rise to power is a bad thing, which makes her role in this story all the more interesting. So anyone who was disappointed with Zendaya's lack of involvement in Dune Part 1 should be happy to hear that she has much more to do in this movie. In fact, her very presence keeps this movie from being a typical tale about a white savior who came to save an indigenous race from his own group of colonizers. That trope has been done to death already, so it was refreshing to see that Chani wanted her own people to liberate themselves. And I especially enjoyed how she recognized that religion and prophecies could be used as a means to manipulate people into enslaving themselves, because it shows that Chani is one smart cookie. She's a free thinker who wants to take action on her own accord. I really respect that about her character, and clearly, I loved Zendaya's portrayal of Chani. But everyone else in this cast is good as well. It's just that with Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya taking up the spotlight, no one else really gets the chance to outshine them. Christopher Walken as the Emperor of Space, for example, doesn't actually have a lot to do in this movie, surprisingly enough, so his character could have been played by anybody, honestly, and the same can probably be said about Florence Pugh's character. But hopefully their characters will get the chance to develop in future installments of this series. Javier Bardem does get the chance to flesh out his character though, which is fun, especially since Stilgard gets to be the comedic relief here, and people liked Austin Butler as Fade, though I think we could have gotten to see more of him as well, and I personally missed seeing more of Stellan Skarsgård as the main villain, since I thought he did such an excellent job in Dune Part 1. So the movie is really well acted, very well written, and extraordinarily well directed, but I haven't even talked about the gorgeous visual effects, the phenomenal cinematography, the creative costume designs, and the beautiful production designs, which all come together to make one damn good looking movie. Dune Part 2 is the epitome of what Hollywood blockbusters should look like. I may be a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but none of the most expensive Marvel movies ever looked this good, so Villeneuve really outdid himself by making a wonderfully compelling sci-fi spectacle that deserved to be seen on the biggest screen possible. Still, if you weren't already a fan of Dune Part 1, then I don't think that Part 2 will necessarily win you over, but if you were a fan of Villeneuve's first Dune film, or just a fan of Dune in general, then I think this movie was made for you. And since I clearly enjoyed the film, it should come as no surprise to hear that Dune Part 2 would definitely get a recommendation from me. So I'll eagerly be awaiting the release of Dune Messiah, but until then, I'll happily settle for rewatching Dune Parts 1 and 2 over and over and over again. But I appreciate anyone who stuck around to hear my full thoughts on this 2-month-old movie, so as always, thanks for watching.